Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Pokies Burke, and this is the Career Slay podcast. Imagine the impact we could have on society if everyone loved what they did. That's what Career Slay is all about. I'm interviewing people who love their jobs and asking them how they got there and what they've learned along the way. We're here to slay the fear in career. Welcome back to Career Slay. I've missed you all, and thank you so much for continuing to support the podcast. This show has been a breath of fresh air for me. I've loved getting to hear such inspiring stories, and it's given me the space to reflect on my own career journey as well. I'm so excited to introduce my next guest and friend, Dave Jackson. Dave Jackson is Director of Admissions for the Master of Accounting program at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He has spent the past 7 years in graduate school business admissions, first at his alma mater, the University of Texas at Austin, for 6 years before joining UNC in April of 2021. He leads a team of 5 that oversees recruiting and admissions processes for the in-person and online formats of the Master of Accounting degree at the Keenan Flagler Business School. Prior to higher education, Dave worked as a journalist and spent 18 years in corporate communications across multiple industries and companies. Dave holds a BA in economics from Bowdoin College and an MBA from UT Austin. What I love about this episode is that we talk about the importance of communication and leadership and how the two skills are inextricably connected. We also discuss why it's important to find purpose in your work and how to find significance and meaning in your job. And I can't forget Dave's one piece of career advice that saved me from taking an opportunity that wasn't quite right for me. This is an episode full of great stories and advice. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Welcome to Career Slay, Dave.
It's an honor, Kelly. It feels like we've come full circle. It was about 6 years ago I was interviewing you for the MBA program, and now you get to interview me.
I know. The tables have turned.
Yes.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
Just kidding. So, Dave, let's dive right in.
Yeah.
Tell us about your story.
So I grew up in about 30 minutes outside of Philadelphia, Wilmington, Delaware, to be exact. I am an only child, which I think is significant to my story because I didn't have siblings to either draft off of or set the tone from. I had to kind of figure out what I wanted. Growing up, education was really important in my family. My parents were both the first people in their families to go to college. They both went to Villanova University. My mom went into teaching and was an elementary school teacher for 50 years. She was that teacher that people on your podcast have talked about as being influential. That was the type of teacher my mom was and the type of person my mom is. And my dad also started out in education, but then his career went down a lot of different routes. He was in HR for a while. He worked in government jobs. He became a trained chef. He was always a good cook at home, but he actually made that official and got a restaurant degree. So the good thing about that was a lot of my friends' parents, or especially their dads, worked for one place for a long time. That was kind of the way that America was back then. But my dad didn't do that. And so it gave me some freedom to kind of say, this is what I want to do right now, but it's okay if it's not what I want to do 5 years or 10 years down the line.
That's awesome. That is so cool. So where did you go to school?
I went to Bowdoin College in Maine, in Brunswick, Maine. It's a small liberal arts school. I wanted to go to the University of North Carolina originally, which is ironic that I'm now working there.
Full circle.
Yes. But this is actually kind of a funny story. I went down to visit after I'd gotten into UNC, and I found out they had a requirement that everybody had to learn how to swim before they graduated. I did not know how to swim when I was a kid. I learned as an adult. So I remember my dad saying to me, do you want the stress of having to learn to swim and then all the other stresses that come with being a college student? And I didn't. So I ended up going to Bowdoin, which was exactly the right place for me. It was a really small school. I got to do things that at a bigger school, I don't think I would have been able to do. I was sports editor of the newspaper. I was the broadcaster for the hockey team. Journalism was really what I anchored myself on early on because I always loved sports, always loved to write, and thought that the best career for me would be to marry those two things.
So how did you get to that point where you were like, I want to study journalism?
First is I always loved sports, baseball especially, but really with all sports. I played on a lot of teams, but if I got into the game, it was either because our team was way ahead or way behind.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to find what would be another area that maybe would be appealing to me. Like I said, I love to write. I grew up in a newspaper era, and I realized, wait, they actually let people go to these games and write about them and get paid to do it. And I thought that sounds like a really exciting opportunity. So I anchored myself toward that, going into college.
That's such a great story.
Yeah.
I love that. So did you end up becoming a sports journalist?
I did. So after college, I moved to Minneapolis. I went to graduate school at the University of Minnesota for journalism. And while I was there, pretty quickly, I got a job with one of the two major daily papers in the Twin Cities. And so I got a chance to cover a number of different sports, everything from major leagues to small colleges to high schools. And I enjoyed it, but I also realized that it wasn't the dream job that I thought it was.
Why so?
A couple of reasons. One is I realized I was a sports fan more than anything else. And when a game happens, I want to watch it. I want to enjoy it. I don't want to have to worry about after the game going and interviewing the players and asking them, what went right, what went wrong. I just kind of wanted to enjoy it for what it is.
You didn't want to work it.
Yeah, it felt like a job. And the other reason is, I think, just lifestyle. Sports happens at night and on the weekends mostly. And that's the time that most of my friends were off. And if we were going to do things, it wasn't going to work very well with the lifestyle and the network I had. So I ended up, deciding to leave journalism and switched over to public relations.
So what did you do in public relations?
I started working for a firm called Weber Shandwick. It's a large PR agency.
Yes,
they have a
familiar.
big office in Minneapolis. And I got that job through my network, actually. When I worked at the Minneapolis newspaper, there was a columnist for the paper named Sid Hartman, who interestingly just passed away 2 years ago at the age of 100.
Wow.
The day he passed away, his column was actually in the paper that morning. He kept writing and working until he was 100. So you want to talk about an inspirational story.
Wow.
Yeah. So he had a radio show with the person who ran the Minneapolis office of Weber Shandwick, and there was a job opportunity there. I said, would you, mention something to Dave Mona, who's the head of the office? And he said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. I went in for my interview, and I interviewed with a variety of people. And Dave came bursting into one of the interviews and said, Sid's told me all about you. We really want to hire you. And the person who was interviewing me was kind of like, well, you kind of just undermine me because I'm trying to actually interview this person and you're telling him he's already got a job. But I did get an opportunity with Weber Shandwick, and I worked there for 5 years. I worked on some sports accounts. I worked on some consumer products accounts. Probably my main account that I worked on was Northwest Airlines, which doesn't exist anymore. It's merged with Delta a number of years ago. But that was the big airline in the Twin Cities. And I found that the airline business was interesting to me for some of the same reasons that sports was. In an airline, you measure a lot of things by the numbers. How many flights are canceled? What percentage of flights are on time? How many pieces of luggage did you, mishandle? All those things.
Statistics.
It's exactly. And I used to love in the morning when I got there and they would send out the report of how the airline did the day before. And I felt like I was, looking at, the Phillies box score from the night before. It really appealed to that side of me. Then I got a chance to go to the client side with Mesaba Airlines, which was a regional affiliate of Northwest.
Okay, so you go from agency side to client side.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about what a person in PR does?
Yeah. If you're on an agency side, you're doing this on behalf of your clients, but you're serving essentially as a liaison between the company and the public. And most of that happens through the media. So you will research what media outlets are going to be the most appropriate for your client's message to go out through. And then when I was doing it, it was what was called smile and dial. You picked up the phone, you called this reporter at this outlet and said, hi, I'm calling on behalf of my client, and they have a story that I wanted to run by you that might be good for your column or your publication. And so it was a lot of pitching stories and helping your clients sort of craft a message that would be appealing to the public.
That's really cool. So what did you do on the client side? How is that different?
Yeah. So I made the decision. I got recruited through a headhunter to join Masaba Airlines. So the job I got was a director of internal communications. And so internal communications is essentially communicating with employees of the firm. But when I got there, they didn't have anybody who was designated for external relations. They worked with an agency. And they realized that because I had spent a lot of time, working with the media, they said, well, why don't you just be our spokesperson too? And as it happened, they were in the middle of some very intense pilot negotiations that went up until the deadline and even a little bit past the deadline. So I had kind of a baptism by fire in that job, because not only was I communicating with the employees, I was also the voice, the spokesperson for the company. And so what I said, I had to feel good that I could turn around and talk to employees the next day and have credibility with them. But it was a great experience. And I can still remember it was about midnight on a Saturday night, and I was standing in a hotel ballroom with the head of the Pilots Association, and we told the media together that we'd reached an agreement. It was one of those things that I think I went home and I just about passed out after that, because it had been so intense.
Wow. So how long did you do that job for?
Yeah, I did that for 3.5 years. They kept giving me more responsibility after the internal and the external communications roles. They added on customer relations. So I had a team of 3 people who basically were the people you contacted when something went wrong with your flight and you wanted to either vent about it or get reimbursed for something. And so I got to really, see the eyes of the customer that way. And that was good for me. One thing about the airline industry that I think is unique is when you buy their product, you're doing it for a very personal reason. You're going to a wedding, you're going to a funeral, you're going on a very important business trip, you're going to be on your friend's podcast, and you want to get there. And so hearing the customer stories really made me appreciate the importance of my role as the voice of the company.
Talk about significance and finding purpose in a job. So tell me more about your career in communications.
Yeah. So after Masaba, I moved to Dallas and got a job with American Airlines, which was a much bigger airline. I thought it would be more of a growth opportunity for me. I started working primarily on their regional airline business, American Eagle, but then I also did some work for what was called the mainline carrier, American Airlines. This would have been about 2007. The airline industry was going through a lot of challenges at that time, and several of the airlines declared bankruptcy. American had avoided it, but I could tell that the only way American was going to get its cost structure in line with other carriers would be to declare bankruptcy itself, which it eventually did. And I didn't want to be there when the airline went bankrupt. I knew that would be a very trying time, and I felt like that was something was telling me to go maybe find a different opportunity. So I got a job with Celanese, which is a chemical manufacturer based in Dallas. The great thing about that role was it was a global role. That's what the growth opportunity was for me there. I was responsible for communications that went out in 6 different languages to employees all over the world. So while I had been working primarily with an English-speaking population in all of my jobs, in this role, I had to understand the different cultural sensitivities, certain things that I would write. My colleagues in Europe and Asia would say, that doesn't translate very well to our population. So it made me kind of be more deliberate in how I wrote, what I wrote. That job, I would say, is the most significant job I've had in my career for a couple of reasons. One, I worked with a CEO who challenged me in a way that I had never been challenged before. Most of the jobs I had up until that point, I got by on the strength of my writing and my pure communication skills. He pulled me aside one day about a month in and said, Dave, I think you're a good writer, but you don't understand what's important to me. You don't understand the business well enough to be able to sit in a room with me and understand how I think. And you need to figure that out to be successful at this company. And it was a huge wake-up call. So I started to think about what could I do to improve my business acumen. I had an economics major in college, but It was, I would say, more of a theoretical economics degree. It wasn't something that I could really turn around and lean on to understand what was going on in a Fortune 500 company like Celanese. So that was when I started to think about getting my MBA.
Wow. Wow. So because of your role and how communication is so closely tied to the executive suite, that is kind of the avenue which opened up the door for you to realize, oh, I need to understand the business side as well.
Yeah, there was a skill gap there with me. And I felt like the best way to close it would be to get in a classroom and immerse myself in every area of business so that I could sit with any leader in the company, not just the CEO, but also the CFO, the head of operations, the head of sales, and really understand what they did. And so I started looking at MBA programs. I chose the University of Texas McCombs MBA program in Dallas-Fort Worth, which I could do while working. And it's one of the best decisions I've ever made.
I agree.
Yes, that's something we share. Yeah.
What did you do after the MBA? Because you were getting this MBA so that you could fill in that skill gap, but with the assumption that you were going to go back to a career in communication?
Yeah, I didn't intend to leave communications, but I wanted to get better at serving my internal clients by understanding more about what they did and understanding what was important to them. And I felt like if I did that, then they might in turn respect the importance of communication, which I believed in. The other reason why I say Celanese was the most important job I had is I met two mentors while I was there. They're both communications consultants, but one is Jim Schaefer. And he taught me that if communications was going to have a future in the corporate world, you needed to show you were adding value in everything you did. So if I'm a shareholder of a company and I go into the sales team and say, what did you do for me with my investment? They could say, okay, we sold this much and we raised this much money. If I went to the operations team as a shareholder and said, what did you do for me? They could say, I made this much product or I took this amount of cost out of the system. But if they go to the communications team and all you can say is, hey, look at our website, it's really cool, isn't it? Mm-hmm. You're not going to be showing value. And when the time comes when a company is going to try to streamline its business, you're going to be one of those areas they're going to look at. And so I never wanted to be in that situation. And so Jim's mantra really, really spoke to me. And it also happened around the time I was getting my MBA. So I was learning more about the business. And then I started to look at my role as another business center rather than an overhead function or a support function. Mm-hmm. The other mentor I met at the time is Alan Nelson. And he taught me about how intrinsically tied communication and leadership are. And he and his company had done a lot of research, and they could prove with pretty detailed analysis that if I think you're a good communicator, then I'm also going to think you're a good leader.
Wow.
And so as a result, leaders have to be very deliberate about their communication. It's their most important role, and it's one they should not wing or overly delegate. And so that made me feel like I could come into any role in communications and say, I understand the business, I understand what's important to you, and I also know I can do something for you that's going to help you and make you better. And that's that communication support role.
Wow, that's really insightful. And I completely agree. Words matter when you're a leader. They're your tool, right?
Yes. Yeah.
They're how you influence other people to go towards the objective or goal that you're trying to achieve.
And when you communicate as a leader, you actually are trying to communicate what you want people to know or do. But when you communicate, you're also saying something about yourself and how you want to be perceived. And you're also saying something about the relationship between yourself and the people you're communicating with. I could tell you, Kelly, take a sip of that glass of water in 25 different ways, ranging from, Kelly, please take a sip of that water now, to, hey, Kelly, this water's pretty good. Have you tried it? I asked you to do the same thing twice, but you perceive me differently based on how I say it, and you perceive how our relationship is.
Wow.
And that's something that as a leader you're doing every day.
Yeah. My toddler quite frequently says, Mommy, do this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And you can say that as a parent too. I mean, you're authoring your relationship with Rosemary with each communication you have with her as she grows up.
Yeah. She's definitely the boss of our relationship. Okay. So what did you do after the MBA?
So I got an opportunity to go work for ConAgra Foods, which is a large packaged food company based in Omaha, Nebraska. I worked remotely because my main role was supporting their manufacturing operations. And so I got to work with Jim Schaefer, who was a contractor for that company, and then a dear friend of mine, Bob Kula, who was the head of supply chain communications. So we would go to their manufacturing plants and identify where they were having performance issues. Might be safety issues, might be quality issues, might be production issues, and figure out where were the communication breakdowns causing those performance issues. So for instance, we went into one plant where they were having a very hard time keeping employees from getting hurt. And we went in and we realized that the employees were not getting all of the right communication about safe procedures. They weren't understanding where some of the hazards in the plant were until they got hurt. They weren't encouraged to report near misses, which when you report a near miss, you then give, an opportunity to address a hazard before it causes somebody to get hurt. So going back to what I said about, adding value to the business, I would work in these plants. I could go back to the headquarters and say, I just improved your safety record at this plant by better communication. I improved the production of your packaged food line through the power of communication. So I worked there for about 2.5 years. It was a very travel intensive job. And I felt like it would be better to be in a role where I was kind of based in one place and be in the same city all the time. So I took a job with Alcon, which is an eye care company based in Fort Worth, Texas. And I worked there for 3.5 years as first their head of R&D communications, so supporting the chief R&D officer, and then eventually the director of internal communications, supporting the CEO.
A lot of people aren't aware that there are communications people for specific functions within the organization. And so that's something that's really surprising to me. So were you just mainly doing internal communications for that specific function, or was it you were representing that function to the public?
No, I was working primarily with that function and the employees who worked within it, on behalf of the leaders. So in internal communications, your audience is the employees, and it could be that function, it could be the whole company. In my most senior roles, I was responsible for all the communication to the employees across the company. And then I would have teams that would work with the functions themselves. And then there was separate external communications functions that I had to work with very closely, because in any company, your internal communications, your external communications need to be saying the same thing.
You had such a great career in communications. You became an expert. Why did you decide to leave it?
Well, so this is something not a lot of people know, but I'll give you the scoop. That decision was actually made for me. I worked at Alcon for 3.5 years. A new CEO came in about midway through, and he and I didn't always see eye to eye on some things. There were some times when I felt like he didn't appreciate my team for what they were doing, and I tried to fight for them, and I tried to vouch for them where I could. But ultimately, it was kind of an untenable situation. And one day I went into work and they told me I was done.
Wow.
And I was pretty devastated at first, because I have always been somebody who kind of lives to work, and to have that taken away from me, it felt like a huge sense of loss. So I took a step back and I started to think about other opportunities, talked to my network, talked to some recruiters. And I could have gone and done something similar to what I had been doing, but I felt like that wasn't necessarily the right thing for me. I wanted to see if there was maybe something else that would give me a greater sense of purpose and a greater sense of accomplishment. I started to think about one question: when in my adult life was I the happiest? And I was at my happiest during the MBA program, because of the people I was with, because of what I was learning. I loved the atmosphere in the classroom. And I thought to myself, can I find something like that replicates that environment? So I went on the McCombs alumni job board, and I thought, well, maybe some of my classmates are going to be looking for people to work with them, or maybe, somebody who is an alum of McCombs who loves that McCombs culture is looking to build that inside an organization. And what I found actually was a job at McCombs as the admissions officer for the program that I went to here in Dallas, Fort Worth.
That is so crazy. Wow. I love that idea of thinking of what made you the happiest. I think all of us are wired to just go, 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 but it's really that self-reflection that gives you the ability to identify your North Star, right?
It was truly a question of what makes you happy, because when I got the opportunity, the first thing in my head I said was, wow, this only pays like a third to a half of what I was making.
Oh my gosh.
I did the math in my head and I thought, well, I could wait 6 more months and find a job similar to the last one. But I realized that that wasn't what I wanted anymore. I didn't want to chase a salary. I didn't want to chase a title. I wanted to do something that I felt like was important and where I was having an influence in other people's lives and in other people's careers and not just focused on my own. And this was a perfect place to do it.
And that's where we met.
That's where we met.
So tell us a little bit more about what was your role at McCombs.
Yeah, admissions is kind of 3 roles in one. The first part is recruiting, and that's getting people who have an interest in the program to understand what it is and help them decide if they want to apply and ultimately if this is something they want to do. The second part is, I think, what most people think of when they think of admissions, which is the selection process, and that's evaluating each candidate through a series of things that they do and saying these are the people that we want to admit into the program. And then the third part is retention, and that's after we make an offer to someone, we know that they're making a big step and a big investment, and so reminding them of that and keeping them engaged all the way up to the point where they enroll in their first day of class, that this is what they want to do and that they feel like they've made the right decision.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more about how your background in communication set you up for this new role?
Yeah, when I was considering it, it seemed very different, just on paper. But then when I broke the role down, I saw that it was using a lot of the same skills I had. The recruiting aspect of admissions is all about communication. It's about what's the message the school wants to help sell its program. And I was very advantaged that I'd gone to the program. And so I could tell my story to prospective students. And I feel like it had some credibility. And I feel like I could show them that an MBA helped change my career. It can make an impact on yours as well. And then the admissions process is very much art and science folded together. And I think this is where my liberal arts education really helped me, because you're making very hard decisions and you cannot take them for granted. You're affecting people's futures with the decisions you make. But, when the information isn't all there, you try to make the most educated guess about whether this person's going to be a good candidate for the program, whether they're going to be able to do the work, whether they're the right fit. And you really have to rely on good critical thinking skills in that process. So I think I was more suited for admissions than I initially thought I was when I even took the job.
Yeah, I remember reaching out to you after I had taken my GMAT, and I bombed the GMAT, let's be honest. But I was like, what do I do? I'm never going to get in. And you kind of just calm me down and you're like, hey, we look at the whole person.
Yes.
It's not just it's one data point. And I guess had you not taken that chance on me, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. So thank you.
Oh, well, it was an honor. And one of the things I tried to communicate to you when I said that was, we care about why you want to do this. It's not just, what you did on one day of your life, which is all that test was.
Yeah.
But what have you done over the course of your career to set yourself up for this opportunity? And then what do you want to do with it? You're making a big investment. You're making often a 6-figure investment. You're making an investment of time, which I would argue is even more important than the investment that you make with money, because you're going to get your money back. You're not going to get the time back.
Yeah.
So you better make the right decision when it comes to something like that. And, you have to know why you're doing it. And so when we see an application like yours or like many of your classmates, where they could clearly say, this is where I am today, this is where I want to get to, and this is why the MBA is going to help me bridge that gap, that's compelling to us. And that's going to carry you through all the challenges you're going to face in the program.
And boy, were there challenges.
Yeah.
It's not an easy 2 years.
No, it isn't.
But very
intense.
rewarding.
Yeah.
Very, very rewarding.
I agree.
So I remember when I was looking for a post-MBA job, I was evaluating one and you gave me some really great advice. It was to run towards an opportunity instead of running away from your current situation.
I remember that conversation really well. What I meant by that was when you're looking at making a change, and usually when you're looking at making a change, there is something about your current situation that you want to try to improve on. But if you only focus on that and focus on getting out of an opportunity you don't like, you're not going to set yourself up well for the next opportunity. You have to feel like you're gaining something when you evaluate an opportunity, and you have to know what that is. And it could be a number of different things. It can be a better financial situation. It can be more growth. It could be more responsibility and having a team. All those things are valid reasons to go to something. But I have found in my career that when I've made changes, the ones that have worked out the best are the ones where I could clearly define what I was gaining from that opportunity rather than what I was leaving behind that I wanted to leave behind.
So let's talk about that. Why did you decide to run towards this new opportunity that you're in?
Yeah, it was hard to leave McCombs. I mean, that was my school and it was my program. And I worked there for 6 years. But the one thing that opportunity couldn't give me was the chance to lead a team. And I felt like that would be a good next step for me as an admissions officer. The other thing that I thought about, and this actually relates to you because it started with a comment that Joe Stevens, our assistant dean, made at your capstone celebration when you completed your MBA. Mm-hmm. He was saying to your class that he felt like he had the best admissions officer working for him. And when he said that, my instinctive reaction was, wow, that's a wonderful thing to hear. But then I thought, am I such a good admissions officer because I'm a good admissions officer? Or am I a good admissions officer because I have this built-in advantage of representing my program? And there's a analogy in sports that I'll use of good teams win at home, great teams win on the road. Mm-hmm. I wanted an opportunity to go work for a program that I didn't go to, where I didn't have that built-in advantage, and see if I could do some of the same things that I did in my role at McCombs. And so this opportunity came along at UNC Chapel Hill in the Keenan Flagler Business School as director of admissions for their Master of Accounting program. It's a different program. It's not an MBA. They're both in the business school, but that's about all they have in common. It's a different base of students I'm working with. I'm working with a lot more current undergrads looking at doing graduate school right away. And those are all challenges that I didn't have in my previous role. And I have a team. And I have 4 people, amazing people that work for me, who I get to help grow, and hopefully they get to the point where they're in the chair that I'm in.
That's amazing, Dave. Congratulations on the new opportunity. That's so wonderful to hear. And I will agree with Joe that you were the best admissions officer.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So what do you love most about your job in this chapter of your life?
I love that I get opportunities to get to know really interesting, really smart, really ambitious people, and really, really fun people too. You know, to have the chance to have gotten to know you and all of your classmates. I think your class and I had a pretty special bond. Yeah. You were my first full class. So yours was the class where I think I finally realized I can do this. But then to see what all of you are doing now and to see where you came from and what you made of that opportunity is incredible. You know, 2 of your classmates met each other in the program and are now married. Yeah. Talk about life-changing.
Yeah.
And they have a new baby. I mean, that's to know that I played, I will say, I don't think a big role, but a role, definitely a role.
It was a big role.
Yeah. I know I played a role, and I'll give myself the credit for that. But I mean, you're all the ones that did the work and earned the degree you got. But I helped open the door for you, and that matters. And you asked a little bit about like, why is finding purpose important? I think the answer to that is because we only have so many years on this earth, and it's important to know what you want to do, what makes you happy, and then go for it. And one term that I'm hearing more now that I really don't like is quiet quitting. If it means setting boundaries between work and your personal life, I think that's admirable, and I think you should do that. But if it means showing up for work and just punching the clock, mailing it in because you think you're exerting control over your employer, you're actually not. You're giving your employer more control because you're allowing them to dictate to you your moods, your feelings for that day, and you're taking agency away from yourself when you approach your job that way. You're better off actually quitting and going and finding something better. You're going to be happier than going in and doing a job that you don't like, or that you feel like you want to constrict yourself within, a series of boundaries. So purpose is vital, and I won't take another job in my life without knowing what the purpose is behind it.
You took a job that was, you said, 1/3 of what you were making before. Yeah. And you did that intentionally because you wanted to find something that was more meaningful to you. How does someone who is going through that same decision-making process get to that? Or what were the things that you kind of weighed out?
Because I had lost my job, and because I went from literally employed one day to unemployed the next, the first instinct I had was, well, just go find something, right? Just go get back in the workforce and start earning a paycheck again. And then when I took that step back, I said, no, wait, I have savings. My wife and I had saved a lot, and we knew we were going to be okay, at least in the short term. So let's start to approach the job process differently. I was 44 years old at that time. I realized pretty quickly I wasn't chasing salary anymore. I had different priorities. And I think a lot of that was caused by what I felt like I gave up going through my career and making money. I sacrificed things in my personal life. I sacrificed things in my marriage. I realized I don't want to sacrifice those things anymore. I wanted to, embrace all those other areas of my life and have a job that I could make an impact in, but also one that gave me, you talk about work-life flow, that flow between work and personal that made me happy as well.
Wow. That's so brave. And I think really inspiring to hear, because I know a lot of people, especially people who are, early on in their careers and trying to climb, feel like they have to hustle and grind and the things that they're giving up. And you get to a point where you look back and you're like, oh, was this actually what I wanted? So taking that step to just recollect and reprioritize and understand what your values are, that's so important.
And in the 7 years that I've worked in higher ed and in admissions, I've never thought about what I make anymore. It's not something that registers with me. I don't care about that anymore. I care about what I do and who I get to work with and who I get to interact with, when I'm on the job.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So looking back, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
I would give my 20-year-old self the same advice that actually one of our professors at UNC gives to a bunch of 20-year-olds that she teaches, and that is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You're going to have things happen to you in your life. You're going to spill coffee sometimes. You're going to lose a job. You're going to have health concerns. You're going to be put in situations that you've never been in before in your work, and just go with them. Most of the decisions you're going to make in your life, you're going to get through and they're going to be okay. But there's going to be uncomfortable moments along the way. And the sooner you get comfortable with being uncomfortable, the clearer you're going to be able to look through those decisions and make the right step for you.
Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I love that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
If you had to sum up your career in 3 words, what would that be?
I thought about this one for a long time. And here's what I came up with. Time and people. Everything in life that you could lose, you can get back, except for 2 things. You don't get time back and you don't get people back. And so what you make of your life is really about how you spend your time and the impact you make on others. And so my advice to people is be generous with your time, be generous with the people you encounter, and try to have an impact. And then also make sure that you put yourself around people who can have an impact on you and make yourself open to being touched by others. Because in the end, that's what a career is all about. That's what a life's all about. And so time and people are the 2 currencies that have mattered the most to me in my career and will continue to.
That's beautiful. I love that. And I completely agree. I often think that, if you die, your employer will post your job the next day, but the people around you, your family, your friends, they can never replace you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Dave, thank you so much. This has been such a great conversation, so inspiring. I have loved every second of it. I know everyone's going to love this episode.
Well, thank you, Kelly. And I'm really glad you're doing this because I think it's an important message to get out there. And most of all, I'm just happy to see you doing well in everything you do. I'm very proud of you.
The Career Slate podcast is a co-production of Career Slate and Wild Reply, produced by Michael Berg. Stay tuned for some great conversations on slaying the fear in career.